Hello and welcome to another video of me figuring out stuff the hard way. So I've probably been messing with cars and coilovers for close to 15 years now, since I was in high school, and turns out I don't know what I'm doing this whole time. So what we're going to be doing today is pretty much redoing everything on the suspension on my competition drift car, because it does not work the way it's set up right now. Apparently you can't just buy coilovers and just bolt them onto your car and go and set your ride height. It just doesn't work that way, and everyone I know does it that way, and I've been doing it that way this whole time. So I've been watching some videos on how the car has been reacting, what the suspension is doing, and it just did not seem right to me. And I ended up posting on Facebook groups and stuff like that, and people mentioned to me that it looks like I don't have the right amount of droop, blah blah, like especially that I don't run a sway bar in the front, and the car kind of like wheelies all the time. It picks up the trailing wheel, so that means that my bump stop and droop were never set, and I know they were never set because I bought these coilovers brand new and I installed them. So I have never done that. I don't know anybody that does that, and it seems like the only people that know about this are people that either race or set up cars professionally. Your average person will just bolt up the coilovers and go, and I've been that average person this whole time, just messing with cars. And now that messing with race cars, you have to learn it, and I wanted to share this experience with you guys, so maybe you can learn something and not ruin your car by putting coilovers on it and not set them up. So yeah, I have to tear my entire setup, front and rear. I gotta take the coilovers, take the springs off of them, bolt them back on the car, set the bump stop, and then go from there, put the spring back on and reset the ride height. I have to make sure I measure everything and set it back right where it is now, because especially in the front, all my suspension movement and articulation requires me to be at this ride height. So the one way you can check this to see if yours is at least somewhat decent, don't watch this video and go, oh, I need to do this, and go tear your car apart. You actually have to have an issue. So the quickest way to figure this out is to jack up the front and the rear, and you want to measure how much your wheel is drooping, which means like when you lift the car, how much the wheel drops. That is droop. Compression is when the wheel goes in, and that would be your bump stop. If your wheel goes too far and it hits everything, that means your bump stop is way too low and you have to raise that. So usually if your droop is good, that means your bump stop is within range, because these things kind of go hand in hand. When your bump stop is correct, that means your droop is good. If your droop is good, that means your bump stop is good, because that is how much of the actual shock is in or out of the base of it, the base of the coilover right here. That pretty much determines right here. This is the body, this is the actual shock that's in there, and how much out you go and how much in determines your bump stop and rebound, or your bump stop and droop. So yeah, I'm gonna tear this apart. don't go and just tear your whole entire car apart. If your droop and bump stop are good, but I'm sharing this as in just general knowledge, or for people that are setting up a little bit more complicated setups. That way, if you are having issues, this is it. If you just got coilovers and you're gonna put them on, do this. If you already have it on the car and you're not having any issues, I'd say just leave it alone if your droop is compression. So unless you're having issues, don't touch it. If you have brand new ones, you have to set it up this way. So learn from my mistakes. I'm gonna tear this apart and I'll show you guys how to do the rest. I'm learning as I go too. If you're doing this on a setup that you've already set your ride height and you want to go back to the same ride height, make sure you measure the overall length that you had from the top of the spring to the bottom of the adjustment ring here, because a lot of this is going to change, but as long as you set the overall height the same, you will achieve the same ride height you were at. So although like how much thread here is sticking out is going to change, you'll be able to compensate with like the length of the spring and stuff like that to be able to get the same ride height. But I'll show that once it's all back together on the car. So I went ahead and released the tension or preload on the spring itself right here. So you just loosen this and then they'll take the tension off of it, and then take the top hat off. Just take the top nut off and the coilover won't go flying. Kind of all came apart, but it's not a big deal. The adjustment knob came out. It just kind of sits in there. But yeah, I guess you want to take that off first. Top hat comes off. Like this. And top perch comes off. And the spring comes off. So if you want to change your spring rate and stuff like that, that's how you take the spring out too. So we'll just set the spring on the side for now. And just gonna put it back together the way it was. So this guy. One thing, don't forget to take the dust boot off so you can see the bump stop. Almost forgot to do that. So take the dust boot off, remove the spring. Now you can see the bump stop. So when you're setting it up in the car, you're not sitting there guessing where it is. So this is it, and we'll get this thrown back in the car and start messing with it. Alright, so I've got both sides back together. You want to pretty much install your coilover exactly how it was. Everything tight, like just pretty much as if you install it back again, just without the spring and the dust boot. I do want to mention that like you can only do this on coilovers that have the dual adjustment. If you just have a coilover that you can adjust like the height from the spring, you can't really adjust how much your actual shock body sticks out. So you can only do this on coilovers with both adjustments. But yeah, I've got like a stick on here, it's on the left. It's easier to do it closer to the ground and use a jack to jack this up, but it's gonna be a little bit tougher to film it on the ground. So I'm gonna try it this way. So I have something here stopping it from coming down, and then I'm gonna drop the car down until the bump stop hits all the way and like the car can no longer compress. And I'm gonna see how much compression it's got, so I have to put the wheel back on and see how I can make this work. So I've got my wheel back on, and I switched to a jack handle instead of the broomstick that I was using, because that I don't think it would be strong enough, so I had to lower it a little bit more. So now I'm going to measure how much it's gonna compress. I stick out so much because I have really long control arms that I probably won't be able to let it compress too much. So we're gonna have to stop it pretty early and just set the bump stop there, because there's really no reason for it to compress that much. You usually want to have, like, autocross people, road racers, whatever, they'll set it up to where it's like a 60-40 ratio. So let's say you can have a full range of motion of 5 inches or 4 inches of full travel. You want 60% of that to be your compression and 40% of that to be your droop. I don't compress that much in the rear or the front because we're drifting, and I have a nice squat set up in the back, so it's supposed to push the tire down instead of compress that much. And I don't have a whole lot of clearance in the front. I don't really want to compress that much. So I'm gonna see how much I can get it to compress before it really starts hitting these fenders. The whole point of having really wide fender and all that, so you don't run into these issues, but it's still way too wide. But good thing for drifting, we don't need to compress a whole lot in the front, well, at least with this setup. I'm mainly having issues with not enough droop because it lifts the front end and my tire comes off the ground and I lose a lot of traction, and the car just pushes through the front. So I'm gonna start lowering it. I'm gonna measure like my wheel gap here. Looks like about 1.25 inches. Actually about 1.75 inches. So we will let it compress. It's got a rubber to that. Alright, so now we're compressing. And that's about as much as I want it to compress, because now I'm hitting. So what I have to do is move my shock body. So I'm going to measure how much there is still left. It looks like 1.25 inches. I'm gonna go 1.5 inches because I'm already hitting, so that will give me about 1/4 inch of clearance on the bump stop. So it's gonna hit the bump stop 1/4 inch before my tire hits my fender. So it looks like we compressed about 1.75 inches. My full motion on this, I would say, is probably, looks like if I compressed 1.75 inches and I still have about 1.5 inches, it looks like maybe 3.25 overall range of motion, overall bench and travel. So 1.5 inches of up is a decent ratio. If I was road racing on a cross, this would not be enough because I would want to compress a little bit more, but for drifting, we set it up pretty stiff. I have 14K strength in the front because I don't run a sway bar, and I'm gonna run it pretty stiff and more favorable to droop. So I'm gonna go ahead and raise my shock body up 1.5 inches, and then I'm gonna do this again, and the wheel should stop 1/4 inch before the wheel hits, and that will give me 1.5 inches more droop. So that'll be the correct way for this to be set up. So I'm gonna get the wheel off and get that done. Wheel off, lock this loose, and what we want to do is take 1.5 inches over here and extend the threads 1.5 inches. So things are going to get a little interesting once I do this, because the way I've always adjusted ride height on the car, I was always told that this would mess with the spring rate and like the preload on the spring. So I've always knocked this loose and adjusted the height. This is where you get into all the issues. Yes, doing this moves your ride height, but you're now changing your bump stop position and your droop position, and these things, once they're set, you should not be touching it. I did not know that. I just learned this. So if you didn't know that, now you know. If you keep changing your ride height here, you will keep ruining your car's drivability. Once the droop and bump stop is set, this gets locked and you never touch it again. You set your ride height through here, and it actually does not mess with your spring rate or like the preload. Once the spring has enough tension on it to compress, it's actually gonna start moving your shock piston until it bottoms out, or if you're going too low, you're now gonna have too much space and not enough preload, and that's why they sell what's called a helper spring. So if you take this and you go really low with this, you, like, let's say you want to be a stancy guy and you're gonna end up being here, you don't have that much spring, so you're gonna need a helper spring to go in there to compensate for being that low. I don't run that low, but we'll see if we end up having to run something like that to get to my ride height. So, all right, so I'm gonna measure this. All right, I have dual adjustable coilovers. So I have compression and rebound on this, so I have an external reservoir. So I have to loosen this. It's an extra step I have to do. Otherwise, this line will get pinched. So as I move this, I have to be mindful of that. So, here. Okay, so as you can tell, I've got a whole lot more droop to work with now. So now going to drop the lift, let it compress, and see if it hits the bump stop before it hits the fender. You know, having only 1.5 inches of compression is on the aggressive side on the compression, but I never have, like, even when before it had 3 inches of travel on the compression, I never hit my fenders, so I never compressed that much. So, as you can see, we are already on the bump stop. So now the bump stop has some forgiveness. So when you hit your bump stop, you don't immediately go to infinite spring rate because it just doesn't compress anymore. It gives you a little bit of more compression, but what you want to do is just keep going until it kind of like comes off the lift. So yeah, I mean, these bump stops are pretty soft on these coilovers, so it's gonna continue to compress. But like I said, even if it can, that's not the worst thing to have. It's just not gonna go to infinite spring rate. So I don't think it will ever end up hitting my fender. So I think when I run it there, I don't think I need to go any higher because I'm just gonna limit the travel even more, and it's gonna hit the bump stop. Like it hit the bump stop about a 1/4 inch before my fender hit, but right now I'm just compressing it so much, and it's very unlikely that that's gonna happen. So yeah, I would say this is pretty good. So now when I go up, pretty much like right about there is my ride height, and this is how much droop I now have compared to before where it was less than an inch. So I probably gained over, I would say, 1.5 inches of compression. So yeah, I would call that a success. Now I just have to take the wheel off and put everything back together. So I'm gonna show you guys the difference here. Look at how much more droop this side has. Like the control arm over here, it's like it's full droop, and it's still like how it is on ride height. But when I go and put the car on the ground, it needs to actually compress back to ride height. So I'll show you guys how to do that in a bit. All right, so I've got everything put back together. So now this is where it gets a little tricky. Remember how I said before you do anything, if it's already installed on the car, you have to measure your overall length, like from the top of the spring to the bottom of this perch here. And this was about 11 3/4 for me, 11.5, 11 3/4. So in order for me to run it at the same ride height, I have to pretty much be at this position, and this will not work because, as you can see, my spring is just going to be loose. Now when the car compresses, like I put it down, it will work, but as it goes up and down, it droops and compresses. This will just be loose, and I will have zero preload on the spring, so that is not the proper way to have it. If you are not going to run too low, that's not going to be an issue for you. I have to run somewhat of a low ride height because of all the alignment setup that I have and how much angle, camber and caster this car has. If I go any lower or any higher, lower it works, higher I start getting into binding issues and I won't be able to run the full angle that I need. So the proper way to fix this is to get a what's called a helper spring. So a helper spring is just a 0 rate spring that will go in here, and it'll just pretty much take up the gap. That's the proper way of doing this, instead of just running whatever ride height you have to run in order for you to have the proper compression and droop. So I measured it and it looks like I gained about 2¼ inch to be able to run this ride height. So from adjusting it, so I will have to get a helper spring, a 0 rate helper spring. I believe a local company should have it, so I'm gonna go give them a call and see if I can grab some. I do believe I'm gonna do the rear as well before I go. That way, if I end up needing some for reuse as well, I'll just grab them. So, all right, so in the rear, I kind of cheated a little bit because I already ran pretty high ride height. So I had a lot of thread already here. So what I did, instead of taking it all apart and take the spring out, my bump stop, I was able to get the spring just lowered all the way down here. I just unthreaded it all the way down. And I was able to get my bump stop to be a little bit above the spring so I can actually compress it all the way. In the rear, I think I'm gonna actually take more out because I already run really high, but I want as much droop as possible so the car can, and I squat. The only thing is I'm gonna be like pretty high, so I don't know. I'm gonna see what it looks like. I mean, I only have another inch of adjustment, but I'm gonna put the tires on, the wheels on, and see what the compression, where it stops, and see if it's a bit too much or not. All right, I've got my handy dandy jack handle underneath it. I'm gonna lower it down and see where bump stop hits. So we're on the bump stop right there. All right, I mean, usually you do this to figure out where to stop it before it hits the body. I pretty much have like miles underneath there. Like I can tuck the wheel pretty much all the way up into here. So if I wanted to go really low, I can. But then it just doesn't work for an I squat. So I think I'm just going to max out the shock body until it I can't go up anymore, and then I'm gonna just match the ride height to where it was, and I should be able to squat you know, a little bit, and give me a lot more droop so it can actually and I squat. So yeah, that'll save me a bunch of time so I can go grab the helper springs for the front and get it all done. All right, so I got my helper springs on there, and I'm just double checking that the right height is still similar to where it used to be, and looks a tiny bit higher. I didn't take into consideration the thickness of the helper spring being fully compressed, but it's still very close to where I had it, and I'm still gonna run it there, but I'm just gonna adjust my toe because it's a little bit higher now, so the toe is gonna be a little bit different. But I'm gonna go up, show you guys how much more droop it's got, and I'll show you guys the helper spring setup. Yeah, so that's a significant amount more droop. So that's probably got like two more inches now that it can droop. Alright, so this is the regular spring. If I did not have the helper spring in here, the spring would just be all loose in there, and I have to run it this way in order for it to be the correct ride height. So this is the helper spring. I can literally compress it by hand. It doesn't add any spring rate or nothing. All it's doing is at droop, it's holding the spring up. So when I actually put the car down, this is fully compressed. So the only thing you have to keep in mind is the thickness of it. Other than that, it doesn't gain any spring rate or any height at all. So you just have to measure what the thickness that this is at when it's fully compressed, and then you just have to know that it's going to add that to your overall ride height. And then what I did is I matched this distance here by only using these guys. So like I said, once you set your bump stop and droop, you don't touch this anymore. You don't adjust your ride height from here anymore. This is wrong because that changes your droop and your bump stop. So you only change it from the spring here, where the spring usually sits. If you want to ride somewhat high, you can use it without a helper spring. I am stuck being a little bit lower in the front. It's still like not crazy low, but in order for my angle kit to work, I have to be at a certain height. So yeah, I had to be about 2.5 inches off the lock here. So yeah, that's the proper way of it working. I was a little bit skeptical at first. I've always just loosened this, and I would either screw this in or out to adjust my ride height, and I would always just set the spring rate or the spring preload in here and not touch it anymore, and just adjust it up and down here for ride height. Obviously, after going through and doing this, I realized that it's obvious that that's been wrong the whole time, and this is the proper way of doing it. Now I have full articulating suspension, so when the car hops, if it lifts the front up a little bit, my tires are not going to come flying up in the air. And so this is going to improve front traction. It's going to improve the car dramatically from like a feel standpoint, because like whenever I would get on throttle, it picks up the front a little bit. I would lose complete like steering feel in the car, and I would just have no idea what's going on. And then by the time it settles back down, my wheels are in like a completely different position than where I started, and it just was pretty much undrivable, to be honest. So yeah, I'm glad that in the last week I was able to figure out getting full angle, and I'm glad that people pointed out to me that this is the proper way of setting up your suspension. So if you get new coilovers that have the dual adjustment, this is the only way to run them. If you run them any other way, your car is just not going to drive right. If they're set up close enough from the factory, you might, but I wouldn't trust it. I would do this process and run them that way. If you have coilovers that are only adjusted here, you don't have to worry about this as much. You just have to kind of run your ride height and go with that. Those are usually the cheaper kind, so I wouldn't even recommend buying those. So yeah, I'm glad I figured this out. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video. I'm learning it the hard way, and I'm trying to share my experience so people don't have to learn it the hard way, or if they were doing it the wrong way this whole time just like me, you guys can fix your setups and you know, just trying to help. But yeah, it's honestly not that bad. It took me a little bit longer because I had to run to the local aftermarket like store, Pegasus Auto Racing. It's local company. They're awesome. They literally have everything. so they always save my ass. So if they weren't local, I would have to sit here and wait to get these. So I wanted to shout them out. If you're in Chicago, Wisconsin area, like Milwaukee, Pegasus Auto Racing in New Berlin, they're awesome. They have pretty much like anything you can think of. They probably have it. Just some odd things, maybe the brand they don't have, whatever, but like fittings, anything, like seats. They even have like racing suits, helmet, like anything you can think of. Just check them out. I know a lot of the guys that watch are locals, so yeah, definitely keep those guys in mind. They don't sponsor me or anything, but it just always helps me, and if it helps somebody local, I'll be glad to to mention them. So yeah, the front is completely dialed. I just have to set the toe before we go testing. And that's the other thing, like I wouldn't have been able to go testing if I didn't get the helper springs. And now this car, maybe for the first time, I will test it in a couple of days, and it will be the first time that this thing is as close to dial as possible. I think my rear setup might be a little bit goofy. I might have to do, well, not might, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna take it apart and put a helper spring on it, lower the ride height a little bit, and that will also give me a little bit more droop. Like it's gonna be the same exact amount of droop, but from the static ride height to the full droop, it will give me more travel. So yeah, I'm gonna just test it this way, and I think it'll be okay. But long term, I think that will be the way to go, because right now it's just, I don't really care about looks, but I think it's even performance wise, it's gonna be a little bit weird. So yeah, I'm gonna close this out. It's probably another long video, but I have to explain all this stuff, and it has to be long. No matter how short I try to make it, it's just not gonna be helpful. So I hope you were learning something enough to stay this long, and if you did, like it, subscribe. I'm always learning stuff on these damn race cars, and always trying to do fun things. So yeah, let me know what you guys thought. I'm sure there's gonna be a bunch of people just like I was in the comment section, like, oh, you did that wrong, blah blah blah. I used to think the same way, but this is the right way to do it. So I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.